Hi everyone, Rozotta here and welcome back to another airsoft video. Today I'm going to be going over my upgraded Tokyo Marui VSR 10 G Spec. This is the rifle that you see in all my videos, which gets me shots like this, and this. So if you want to know exactly what upgrades I've put in my VSR, then stay tuned and hopefully you enjoy this video. So the base model of this rifle is a Tokyo Marui VSR 10 G Spec. I purchased it in 2012 and have been tinkering with it and upgrading it ever since. Before I owned this VSR, I actually owned an MB01 L96 sniper rifle. That's the Warrior L96, but there were some things I didn't like about it. I didn't like the upgrade options available, and also I thought the hop unit was absolutely crap. One of the things that you will come across if you're purchasing certainly a Marui VSR is whether to go for the Pro version or the G Spec, and there are a few differences between the two models. The first thing is the bolt handle. The bolt handle on the G Spec is more flush with the rifle. It's much nicer, to be honest. I don't feel like I need to change this bolt handle. It's quite comfortable. The next thing, the barrel is shorter on the G Spec version. The outer barrel and the inner barrel are shorter. I believe the inner barrel on the G Spec is 303mm, whereas if you go for the Pro version, the stock inner barrel is 430mm, and that is definitely something to consider. The longer your barrel is, the more power you're going to have in the rifle with the same configuration. Finally, the last difference between the Pro and the G Spec versions of the Marui VSR is the built-in suppressor. Okay, so with that stuff out of the way, let's start talking about the actual rifle itself. So externally, this stock here is the original Tokyo Marui stock. The scope I've got on my VSR is made by a company called Laylax. It is a 3x9 x 40mm scope. I've had this scope again since 2012 and it cost me about 30 quid and it's been solid. Generally when I'm playing airsoft, I'm using my scope on either a 3 magnification or a 4 magnification. Rarely will I be going above 4, maybe to check some targets sometimes or just see what's going on inside like a sort of a dark room or a building in the distance. I might just zoom in to have a quick look. I do use it on a higher magnification when I'm actually zeroing the rifle in, and then once it's all zeroed in, I'll pull it back to about a 3 or 4 times magnification. Just briefly talk about the scope cam on the rifle. This is the original run cam scope cam. One little quick tip for the guys filming their videos and using scope cams. I created this sunshade on the lens just here, and what this does is block out some of those really intense glares of sunlight that you're going to get if you just have the scope cam without a sunshade, and it can ruin your videos. I've made the sunshade literally just out of an old 35mm film roll canister. What I've done is basically just chopped off the end, and it just perfectly fits onto the end of the camera lens, so it's just held there by friction. Obviously I put on this tape which keeps it a bit more snug. And the beauty as well of having this on is if I don't want to use the scope camera, I can just literally use the lid from the 35mm canister and just click it into place, which stops BBs hitting the scope. I actually found this sling through one of the Grey Fox videos. It's actually a sling for an M60, but it works really well. It's got some really nice padding as well, which makes it comfortable to shoulder for long periods of time. And yeah, this is a cracking bit of kit. I'd recommend it. Another thing I've got on my scope is this little notch here, which helps me zoom in because it is actually quite stiff on this particular scope. This is the product just here. I think it's actually for fishing rods, but it fits really snug around the scope ring and allows you just to adjust the magnification of your scope, because obviously it has a much larger handle to grab. On the run cam, I've obviously got my power lead going into the camera just here, which is a USB cable, and it wraps all the way around onto the other side of my scope here, where I've got a power bank. One final point to make on sort of external upgrades and modifications I've done to my VSR is to do with the magazines just here. You see this little bit of string coming out of the magazine, and that is actually a little bit of paracord. As you'll know, VSR magazines, the spring actually wraps around the outside of the magazine, which means the actual center is hollow. So what I've done is drilled a hole through the middle and just run some paracord through, and I've sort of tied it up, put a little bit of glue on, and just burnt the ends, so it's not going to come undone. That's on there pretty solid, and it just allows you to pull them out a little bit easier. just like that. Whilst we're talking about the magazines, if you are having feeding issues with your VSR magazines, you're finding you're needing to put pressure on the bottom of the magazine for it to feed correctly, just try loosening these two screws on the magazine just here. You'll actually find that the spring inside the magazine can move that just a little bit more freely, which will allow it to push the BB stopper all the way up into the chamber without you having to put any pressure on the bottom of the mag. In terms of power on my VSR, I'm getting around 2.1 joules with hop set for 0.45 gram BBs. I'll always use Jeff's or BLS, and I'll always use Bio BBs when possible. Let's talk about internals. Obviously, I've taken off the stock now. I've taken off the scope. I've taken off the suppressor, and obviously the magazine as well. One thing to note when you are disassembling a VSR is when you take off the stock, there's a little spring, which is part of the magazine release catch. Just be really careful that doesn't spring out, because you will lose it very easily. It's a tiny little spring. If you lose that, you're pretty buggered. So obviously, when you first purchase your Marui VSR, the stock trigger is basically like pot metal, and it's a 45-degree Sears, which means it's holding a piston at a slight angle. It is made to use the stock spring, which produces about 290 FPS on a 0.2. And if you chuck a new spring in there with those Sears, it's just gonna break. This is a Bulltrigger. This is one of the original Bulltriggers. I think there's like a version 2, maybe a version 3 now. This is probably the best upgrade I have bought for my VSR, and I think it really allowed me to upgrade everything else with a lot more ease. This is a 90-degree trigger set, which means that it holds the piston inside the cylinder center. It allows for a very, very smooth bolt pull. It allows you to put much higher power springs in without the rifle shitting itself, basically. Upgrading from a 45-degree Sear set to a 90, in my opinion, is the best starting point for when you're upgrading your VSR. Now, I've still got the trigger guard on here, and that's because when you install a Bulltrigger, you actually have to do a little modification to the trigger guard just to shave a little notch off, which would usually sit just here, but it just means that your trigger guard can fit in there. You see it sort of nice and flush against the trigger. Those of you with a keen eye will notice that the receiver is slightly different. It has a slightly different shape just here, and that's because this is an Action Army right-hand receiver. This isn't the original Marui one, and the only reason I replaced this receiver was because I stripped the threads on the original receiver because I was taking it apart and putting it back together so many times through the various years of upgrading it. Definitely something to bear in mind if you're upgrading a rifle and you're going to be putting it back together, reassembling it, disassembling it a lot. Just take care when tightening screws, because if you strip the threads, you're going to bugger it, and the only way really, apart from rethreading that piece, is to buy a replacement part. One done. So the cylinder and the cylinder head just here are actually the original Marui parts. Now you're probably thinking, hang on a sec, why haven't you upgraded these when you've upgraded everything else? I haven't had any issues with mine, and they show very little signs of wear. It performs really, really well. So for me at the moment, there is no point in replacing these parts. This is 10 years old, this cylinder. The only wear is just on the bottom there. You might be able to see it on the camera. There's a little bit of a scrape, and that is a result of me over tightening the body screws, the two screws that hold the stock into the receiver. The thread there actually runs directly into the cylinder. So if you actually tighten the stock on too much, you will find that it actually scrapes the cylinder when you are pulling the bolt back. Just another note in terms of screws scraping against the cylinder. This is the same for the 4 screws on the top here. If you over tighten these, they will actually again scrape against the top of the cylinder. So it's one of those things where you just got to tighten them a little bit, make sure they're biting, don't over tighten them, otherwise your bolt pull won't be as smooth. Let's talk about the spring guide, and the piston. First of all, let's remove cylinder head. I've got on here what they call a Sorbo pad, and this is basically a product made by, I believe, Laylax, and they're kind of just like dampening for your cylinder head. The idea is that it makes it ever so slightly quieter. I've noticed a very small difference, but it's so small and subtle that's probably not really worth the hassle, really. I do find with these, the black will peel off. I'm talking probably like 5 or 10 skirmishes or something like that. If you're going to put one of these on, just make sure that you keep an eye on it because eventually it will need replacing. This is my setup that I currently use for my piston. As you'll see, this is the Sniper Mechanics W.A.S.P piston, and the spring is a Modify 13mm, and that's very important. It's a 13mm spring, M150, and this is the spring guide that comes with the W.A.S.P. The W.A.S.P I've got here, you'll notice that I'm actually using the lightweight sleeve, and that is because I found that I was actually getting the most power out of my rifle using the lightweight sleeve. I'm currently running a 300mm inner barrel, and so I'm actually trying to build up my power a little bit to make up for the shorter inner barrel. And I found that the lighter sleeve on the W.A.S.P actually gave me the most power. I was actually losing power using the medium or heavy sleeves. I've also got the air brake on. This is a medium air brake. I did some tests between the different air brakes, and I found that the variance in FPS was about 10 between each one. So you lose 10 FPS each time you put on a slightly longer air brake. On 0.2s. So these are the two different sleeves. Obviously, you've got your medium sleeve here and the heavier one if you want to. And you've also got the two different air brakes here. So that being the very shortest one you can get, and that being the longest. This model of the W.A.S.P is the latest version as of recording this video. So I believe it's the version 2. I'm really, really impressed with it. It also provides a really great air seal. And yeah, it is good. It is a 90-degree piston. You need to make sure that you've upgraded your trigger to a 90-degree trigger if you haven't done so already. So I thought I'd just show you my old setup on my VSR, which I used for absolutely years. Like loads of my YouTube videos actually have this setup in. This piston here is the Action Army 90-degree piston. This is actually a really good piston. It's obviously a lot cheaper than the W.A.S.P, but the performance is very good, and I would still recommend this piston. This spring here is a 9mm spring, and this works fine with the Action Army piston, no problem. But if you are using a W.A.S.P, you need to make sure that you purchase a 13mm spring. As you can see here, if I swap the springs over, the spring guide won't actually fit into the spring. You need to make sure that you get a 13mm spring for it all to fit correctly. Let's take a look at the hop up. Now, one of the main reasons I purchased a VSR was because of the hop unit. The L96 had a really poorly designed hop unit. You actually had to use an Allen key and adjust the hop from underneath in the magwell. And it's an absolute pain in the arse. With the VSR had a lever on the side just there, which allowed you to adjust the hop on the fly. And I used that up until very recently, actually. But I wanted a TDC because I wanted to get the most out of my hop. I like this. Obviously, TDC means top down center. It means the pressure is being applied directly from the top and not from a lever, which is going to be applied from the side onto the top, which could lead to hooking. First thing you'll notice is obviously this. This is a Tridos TDC 2.0. And this is the Pro version. Now, I'm not going to take this all apart because it's very fiddly. What I will tell you is that I'm using the stock TM hop chamber, and the bucking I'm using is a Sniper Mechanics Flamingo 60-degree bucking. The barrel I have in here is a Crazy Jet 300mm barrel. Now, one of the things with the Tridos TDC, and I've got the package here. By the way, I absolutely love this Novrich picture in here. This is so good. One of the things that comes with the Tridos is a selection of different nubs. You can see here comes with 4 different types. I'm using the silver one at the moment, which seems to perform the best. Now, I did originally have this, I think it was the grey one in, maybe it was the black. The problem I had with it was that I would adjust the hop down, but when I wanted to take some of the hop off, the actual nub would just get stuck and it stopped moving, which meant that I could only ever apply more hop, but never less. And what I had to do is basically disassemble the hop unit to release it. So what I did was replace the nub with the silver one, and I didn't have that problem. So I don't know if it's something to do with the material that's used, but it was just getting stuck. I mean, I'm sure a small little file could kind of sort that out. So that was one issue I had with my Tridos TDC when using it. Another issue that I had when installing my Tridos TDC was the drill bit that was supplied actually snapped halfway through me drilling through the outer barrel. I'm pretty sure this wasn't me like doing something daft. I was very, very careful when I was installing my Tridos hop. Lucky I had a spare drill bit on hand that was the exact same size as this one, and I was able to continue with the installation. So obviously, to adjust the Tridos hop, you just literally turn the wheel here, I don't know if you can hear that on the mic. It clicks. The adjustments are so tiny, which is one of the real selling points of this. You can make really minuscule adjustments to really dial in your hop. Yeah, I love the design of this. It's very well thought out. It's very considered, and yeah, it's a great product. So I mentioned earlier, I have a Flamingo bucking in here. This works very well. I'm really impressed. One thing I will say about the Flamingo bucking is that you need to have a open barrel. You can't use it with a bridged barrel because the contact patch is so large. What I mean by that is, here's the original VSR G Spec barrel, and you can see there it's got a little bridge. So that means that the hop rubber can't actually function correctly with this in there. So it needs to be unbridged, open barrel, to use the Flamingo bucking, which is the reason why I swapped out this barrel for the Crazy Jet inner barrel, which is in there at the moment. So I thought I'd just show you guys some of the old setups that I was using. This is a 9-ball rubber, and this is excellent. This is a really good bucking, along with the stock barrel was a really good combination. The other part I was using in this setup for a long time was this ASPUK, I think it's called a Sniper 1 pop-up lever. After that, I moved to having the current setup with the Flamingo bucking and the Crazy Jet, but before I had the Tridos TDC, I was actually running this Maple Leaf red hop-up arm. To be honest, I wasn't that impressed. I actually found that the hop-up arm snagged a lot when I was adjusting it, and meaning it was always applying a little bit too much pressure and over-hopping stuff. And when I would sort of release it a little bit to apply less hop, it didn't seem to move freely. I didn't really have the patience to play around with it because I knew I wanted to upgrade to a Tridos TDC at some point in the future. You know, I'm sure some people have had some really good performance out of it. It's probably, again, just my specific setup. So there you have it. This is my upgraded Tokyo Marui VSR 10 G Spec, and those are all the parts I have inside of it. Obviously, the big question these days is going for an SSG 10 or going down the VSR route. Probably doing this now in 2022. I would go for the SSG 10. You're just getting more for your money with an SSG 10, and even if you do want to upgrade it, you know, you can use that as a starting point, and you can swap out parts, for instance, like the W.A.S.P or the Flamingo bucking, or, you know, the Tridos TDC. Whereas if you go down the VSR route, you are going to be swapping out, you know, a lot more stuff. The trigger being probably the more expensive thing to upgrade. But like I said, that wasn't an option back in 2012. It was you just get a VSR and you start upgrading it, which is where we are today. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy the video, then please subscribe to the channel. Leave any questions you have down in the comments section, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them. I should probably put this back together now.